Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we've got another video that has been requested a number of times by you guys. We're going to look at the Mark 37 gunfire control system, and this is the system that aims the 5-inch guns. So, the Mark 37 system is comprised of a rangefinder, and then that is transmitting signals down to on the battleship, the plotting rooms, where there is a stable vertical and a forward Mark I able computer and some other components, and then that is plotting a solution that gets sent to the 5-inch guns. The Mark 37 can be cross-wired to fire the 16-inch guns if needed, but it's really optimized for the 5-inch guns. And we have 4 of these Mark 37 directors, all around the 05 level of the superstructure. And in fact, really, they're up on the 06 because they each have a 1-story tall tube like this one that's armored, that the director itself sits on to give it a little bit more elevation. So we got one at the forward and the aft end of the superstructure, and then one on each side. And that's a pretty common layout for American battleships during World War II, particularly the ones purpose-built with the 5-inch Mark 38 gun system. The Mark 37 director is a direct descendant of the Mark 33, which started arming the ships in the mid-30s. And as soon as those started being installed as the anti-aircraft directory on battleships and other smaller vessels, the Navy decided they wanted to make something a little bit lighter. So they almost immediately, as the Mark 33 was being rolled out, started development of what would become the Mark 37. They did not end up with a lighter director. They ended up with something that's about 2 tons heavier. To save weight, they removed the plotting boards and computer system from the director itself and shifted them down to a plotting room built into the ship. And that's why on, say, the Pearl Harbor era battleships, the older battleships that had anti-aircraft guns added, you see a lot of Mark 33s. And on the purpose-built battleships, you see a lot of the later Mark 37s. So, yeah, they moved all that weight down below from the computers. That's at least 1.5 tons right there. But they added a bunch of other stuff into it, which made these an altogether better system entirely. However, the weight of the system precluded it from being used on all types of ships. The battleships and cruisers all tend to have it as their secondary battery directors with a number of different mounts per ship. Destroyers tended to each carry 1, although some of the older classes of destroyers couldn't for weight-saving reasons, and the war-built destroyer escorts, the upgraded Coast Guard cutters, a number of ships just did not have the reserve of buoyancy to slap one of these up on top of the superstructure. But almost all of the American war-built ships get one. Like I said, we've got 4 of these directors, and really they're at the 4 corners of the superstructure. There is not a separate director for each gun. The guns can go under local control if they need to, and they've got their own little setup in there. But it is expected that one director, the director focusing on the quadrant that the guns need to be fired in, would be controlling the entire battery, or at least the whole battery that can be brought to bear. There may be instances of aerial attacks where planes are coming in from a side and the front of the ship, and you might have the battery partitioned off to go in different directions, and that's why there are 4 directors and 4 computers. But in general, all the guns are pointing in the same direction. And that much is the same for the Mark 38 directors controlling the 16-inch guns. They've all got redundancies, but they tend to all be used in one direction. Another interesting thing to bring up out here, typically something like this would be important machinery and should be covered in armor. On board destroyers, these directors had a 1/2 inch of armor, weighed 16 tons. On board the battleships, they only had an 1.5 inches of armor and weighed 21 tons. Now, destroyer 1/2 inch of armor is a lot, But on a battleship, because we're mounting them so high and there's so many of them, there's no, you can't put 16 inches of armor plate on it. It's just too much top weight. So the 1.5 inches of armor is essentially splinter protection. It's pretty comparable to the level of armor on other 5-inch weapon systems. So again, enough for splinter protection, not really going to stop an enemy battleship round from knocking it out. And that's another reason why there's redundancy in these systems with 4 of the mounts and 4 of the computers. In addition to the redundancy, each director, the wiring to it goes through multiple routes. And they go through armored tubes like this one all the way down to third deck. And we've done other videos where we crawl through these armored tubes and talk about them at length. But each of the directors has duplicate wiring so that if a shell hit goes through one of the wiring tubes and disables some of the power, some of the signal being sent from this, there is another route that it also goes. So redundancy is in many ways used even more so than armor. While we're out here, I should also take a minute to mention the antenna on top of the radar. That changes a couple of times. While the Mark 37 directors stay in use from just before World War II, there's about 40 of them in the fleet when the United States enters the war. By the end of the production run of these guns, 841 have been made, and they are used all the way up until the 80s and 90s on Iowa-class battleships, and exist on many other classes of ships as well. So even though this system lasts a long time and it goes through 90 some odd modifications over the years, the major structure stays the same. The one visible difference that you'll see on ships is early in the war, they added a radar antenna to these. It was designed without radar in mind. By the time the United States entered the war, radar was becoming prevalent with fire control, so they got a Mark IV antenna. And that's a sort of square antenna with angled in on each side. Within about a year or two, they had upgraded that to a Mark 12 antenna. And the Mark 12 looks very similar to the Mark 4. And when they got the Mark 12, it also got a Mark 22, what's known as the orange peel antenna, which is a little curved antenna that hangs off on the side of the Mark 12. And then in the mid-50s, the Iowa-class battleships, and most other ships still using the Mark 37 system, got the Mark 25 antenna, which is the round dish that you see today. And that antenna was used from the mid-50s all the way up into the 90s. Much like the antennas for the 16-inch guns, it still worked, so they didn't change it at the end of the ship's career.
All right, so these directors are not on the tour route. We are now inside the base. We're still in the 05 level. This ladder, we're in the top. There are 2 ladders, one at the forward face, one on the back face.
There would be 5 guys in here, 3 sitting on one side up there and 2 on the other side.
In here is a lot of the electrical stuff for that, and some pieces and parts that the Navy left in here as part of the demilitarizing process. In the overheads here, you can see the planetary ring that this rotates on, and you can see the stop that holds it in place, and the motor system that actually turns it. And here's a gear over here
that actually meshes with that planetary ring.
You can see that's still good and greasy. I bet you if we could put power to this, it would still spin just fine. Something that a lot of models and video games and other things tend to get wrong is whenever the guns rotate to point at a target, they are following the director. So the director should also be rotated to point at that target. So if you play any video games where you see as you turn your guns, your directors are also turning, that is a good game, as opposed to where those models are stagnant and it's just the guns that turn around. So here we are in the forward portion of the director. There are 3 seats here, not that you can tell it. This seat and this seat here fold down. This one has to be folded up so that you can actually get through the hatch. A director is just like a gun turret. It's an armored box, except instead of having gun barrels sticking out of it, it has ears that stick out of the side. In the case of this, it's the optical rangefinder, which goes out either side of the ship, and that's what this was designed to use. Rangefinding, you're triangulating the position because you know the length of your rangefinder. And so with the optics in there, you can find the range to a target. You point the rangefinder at the target, and you now know the bearing to that target. So the bearing tells you what direction to turn your guns, and the range lets you know how high to elevate them. The addition of the radar antennas means that you can find quicker, more accurate range-finding data, if you trust such technology. Not all American commanders at the beginning of World War II did, but they certainly learned to by the end of the war, the ones that survived. Here in the forward part of the director, you've got a couple different control stations. They have triggers on them. This isn't the primary place you can fire the guns from, but you can still fire. And you've got a telescope here. There's at least 2 telescopes here and a slewing gun sight. You got some wheels in the top, so you can crank open viewports, and those are all sealed shut as part of the mothballing process. We've got this really cool fire arc paper. It's just a sheet of paper that's been taped to the overhead. It shows you what the arcs of fire of the various 5-inch guns are. Interesting, Mark 51, the starboard side forward one, can go from 10 degrees to 163 degrees. But Mark 52, right on the opposite side, goes from 8 degrees to 183 degrees. I'm not quite sure why those arcs are different. Yeah, none of them have the same arcs of fire. So that's interesting. We've got some scopes around. These are for the radars. For your range-finding radars, it's not like the 3-dimensional map with the arm going around that beeps whenever it hits a target. It's more like an EKG reading with a straight line that when it hits something, it gives you a blip. So where that blip is, you know the range. You don't need the full rotation because you are literally pointing the director with the radar on top at your target, as opposed to those search radars, which are spinning on their own as part of their setting on a target. So you get accurate information in that instance that the search radar hits it, but then it keeps going around, and like you see in the movies, when it comes back around, the target has jumped in position because it's moving. With a rangefinder, you turn this at your target and you hold it on that target, and you get continuous up-to-date information to feed into the directors. All right, so now we are in the back portion of the director, and it's accessed from a separate ladder. Here you can see the optical rangefinder, and where you would look through it, and you can see that this has melted over the years. They've got a fan in here. That's a great addition. We've got another radar console here. It's interesting. On the other side, the seat's folded. On this side, it's just a cushion that you sit on the frame. So here's an interesting feature in here. This is the missile salvo alarm, and it specifically has a tag on the side that says Harpoon/Tomahawk salvo warning. So this was obviously added in the 80s, just straight bolt on, and it says that it was deactivated 23 June 1990, and you could activate it by putting it together. Thanks. That's probably a system that's still in the inventory that could be, that they still have the experience to do. Many of the other pieces of equipment in here also has reactivation tags. Activated by closing unit. Activate by removing spacers. So yeah, there's washers that are pushing this panel out. So it's interesting that as the part of the mothballing process, they remove a lot of this stuff or render it inactive. They don't just pull the fuses. Not sure why. It makes sense with these. These are supported probably when the ship gets brought back. People know how to use this. The rest of the equipment in here is not in the inventory anymore. It's not supported. There probably aren't too many shipyard workers around who remember taking these apart when Wisconsin was reactivated in '88. I think that if the Iowas were ever reactivated again, the Mark 37s would be removed, and probably the 5-inch 38s along with them, and a more modern, maybe a 5-inch 62 would be, or 63, whatever the Arleigh Burkes have these days, would be put on with the associated directors from those, replacing these. But that would require a lot of work and money. We've talked about the range-finding computers and how they work in a couple other videos, so I'll be brief here, as brief as I can be. We are in forward secondary battery plot. So this is down on 4th deck. In the forward part of the ship, there is an after main and secondary battery plot on 3rd deck all the way at the other end of the ship, so that if one of these spaces takes a catastrophic hit, it doesn't knock out all of the fire control capabilities for the ship. And then each of the 16-inch gun turrets also has their own smaller computer. So the redundancy, again, is the word of the day when it comes to battleship designs. No matter how thick your armor is, somebody always builds a weapon that can punch through it. So you have to be able to take a hit, even if it damages you, and switch over to other systems, which is part of the reason why we have multiple plots. And the other part is, with aerial threats, we could be engaging multiple targets simultaneously. So we've got multiple directors that can take one side of the ship or part of a battery and aim at one target while other directors are pointing at another target.
All right, after we know where the target is, now we have to hit it. There's many factors that go into this, many quantities. Most of them are automatic. We have to know our ship's course. That comes in automatically from the ship's master gyro compass. We have to know the speed of our ship. That comes in from what's called the pitometer log or pit log, which basically would be a speedometer in an automobile. The wind is definitely a factor on a projectile. We have to know the wind speed and direction. That comes from what's called an anemometer, which is, again, high up in the ship's superstructure. We have to know the target course and speed, which is computed inside the computer once we put other factors in. We also have to know ballistics facts, which are incorporated into the solution in the computer. We have to know the weight of the projectile, the weight of the powder, which in this case the 5-inch projectiles weigh a little over 54 pounds. It takes about 15 pounds of powder inside the cartridge case to fire each projectile. We even have to know the temperature of the gunpowder that we're using, and that's obtained within the magazines where the projectiles and cartridge cases are stowed. All these knobs and cranks that you see have two positions: automatic, which is what they're set in during actual operation, and hand. The hand is mostly for tests. We had to do tests, static tests on this on the computer every day, in order underway. And there were various quantities that have to be set in, and we were given tolerances to find out whether it was within specs. If it was slightly out of spec, then we could make adjustments in the computer. If it was way out, we had to contact Ford Instrument Company, which was the manufacturer of the computers. It's Hannibal C. Ford Instrument Company, located in Queens, New York City, and has nothing to do with Ford Motor Company. It's just strictly a coincidence. But they would send an engineer down, and we would have to lift the cover and work with him to make all the adjustments that had to be made. Fire control solution is reached. We transmit signals, small electrical signals from the computer up into the gun mounts, where they are amplified many times to operate both the train motor drive, which moves the entire gun mount in a horizontal plane, and also the elevation drive motors, which move the guns individually or together in elevation up and down. It took 8 people on this ship, not quite as many on the destroyers as I worked with, but it took 8 people to operate this computer. Actually, all fire controlmen to operate each computer, which means that within this rather tight space, there would be 16 sailors during general quarters or any operation of the computer, any firing exercises. Took 8 people. Range operator, pretty much all he had to do under normal operation was just make sure that these dials were moving and keeping up with the target. His main function is to watch these range dials, that they're as near as he can tell, keeping up with the target motion, target speed. NGFS, naval gunfire support, and shore bombardment. We'll have Marines on the beach near the target, spotting our fall of shot in relationship to the target.
Again, like we said before, whilst the guns can go under local control, there is not a dedicated director and computer for each individual gun. So you are limited in the number of targets you can track with directors. There would be an air defense warfare officer on the 011 level, who was a lieutenant commander, who would be in charge of designating priority targets. And he's just a lookout position, identifying what aircraft are coming in and deciding which ones to engage. And then he's radioing that to the directors. The directors are picking them up, finding the ranges, and then sending it down here to the Ford Mark I Able. This is the ubiquitous American fire control computer of the 20th century. Basically from the Great Depression era, when we started building these electromechanical analog computers, all the way up until the 90s, these were in use. So in an entire 2 or 3 generations of sailors, fire controlmen, learned their craft on these computers. If that includes you, let us know in the comment section down below. So these computers are very similar to the Mark 8 that aims the 16-inch guns. However, the Mark 8 is only firing in 2 dimensions. You're firing from one surface target to another surface target. That has twice the range as one of these. The 5-inch guns top out around 9 or 10 miles against surface targets, but they're dual purpose, and so too are the computers. These can be used to plot solutions when you're firing at either a surface target or an aerial target. And firing at a surface target is simple. When the shell hits, it either hits the target and explodes, or it doesn't. Against an aerial target, you've got to plot where it's going to be in 3-dimensional space and tell the shell to explode at that point in space at the time that the aircraft is passing through it. So you've got to figure out where you are setting your fuse for. Now, later in World War II, these computers were modified for the VT fuse, the veritably timed fuse, which are 5-inch projectiles that have their own radar in them that sends out a small signal, and when it picks up a target close, it explodes automatically. So that means you no longer have to plot that fuse. But This computer was designed to and still can do that. In addition to aerial targets where you have to plot where this can explode, it also has a section bolted on the top for star shells. Prior to radar, it was often important to illuminate targets at night. You can do that by launching your float plane and having it drop flares, although very difficult to recover a float plane in darkness, so much easier to just fire a shell from your secondary battery. And when it gets to the position that this has plotted for it in three-dimensional space, the shell illuminates with a phosphorus light and is suspended from a parachute. So it will float down over a period of time so that you are illuminating your target. When you do this properly, the shell explodes beyond the enemy fleet so that they are silhouetted between the light and yourselves, and you are not silhouetted at all. The battleship was also built with searchlights to illuminate targets, but a searchlight goes both ways. You can both see what's being illuminated and where that beam of light is originated from. So during early nighttime naval battles in World War II, turning on your searchlights was a death sentence for American ships. The Star Shell is a much better system. Once the Ford Mark I Able has plotted your fire control solution, you now have a super precise way of aiming the guns. However, you're still firing from a moving platform. And the computer takes into account the ship's own speed, but we're also moving, pitching, and rolling as waves hit us, or as we're maneuvering. That's where this comes in. Earlier fire control systems required that you point one rangefinder at your target and another rangefinder at the horizon so that you can see how much your ship is rolling. We want to be able to acquire multiple targets at once. We don't want to have to use both of our rangefinders, one of them to look at the scenic Pacific skyline. So the stable vertical was invented. And this is a gyroscope that will sense when the ship is off center. And you've got three triggers here. The Salvo signal alarm, which you would pull, and that rings a bell to let everyone know we're about to fire. Then there's the automated key, also known as the pineapple, so you can definitely tell when you've grabbed that versus one of these other smooth ones. And the automated key, you pull the trigger and hold it down, and it doesn't close the firing circuit automatically. It goes to the gyroscope. So the gyroscope will hold the firing circuit open until the ship returns to level and the solution that the computer has plotted is accurate, and then it closes the circuit so that the rocking of the ship does not throw off the solution. If the gyroscope isn't functioning right, or if you're at such close range, it doesn't matter. You've also got a hand firing key, which is not the pineapple, which you pull the trigger and that just closes the firing circuit. That's more of a last-ditch thing than something that would have been generally used. Now, we've talked about redundancy a couple of times in this video, and I don't think there's any feature on this ship that highlights that better than the switchboard back here. What do all these switches do? That's a common question I get on my tours. I don't know. Most of them have tags.
This is the fire control switchboard. There are a total of 252 switches on here. There would be one switchboard operator assigned to each computer, which comes up to a total of eight people at each computer: your range operator, bearing operator, elevation operator, plotting room officer, and your stable element operator. What the switchboard does, you can compare it roughly to the old telephone company switchboards. They could direct calls to various telephones in different locations. What the fire control switchboard does is direct various electrical signals from the computer, mainly up to particular gun mounts. In addition, it can send signals back up to the director to make certain corrections in the fire control solution. Through this switchboard, we can have a forward director control an after gun mount, and vice versa.
The switches exist with different switches for each of the fire control computers, each of the range finders, and each of the guns. So the various places you're getting your information from and plotting your solutions and firing from can all be cross-connected. So if gun number 1 wants to get its solution from computer number 3 and rangefinder number 4, you can hit switches to make that happen. You start taking damage and computer number 3 is no longer working, you want to switch to computer number 2, you can reconfigure that through the switches. So the sheer volume of switches here shows you the massive redundancy built into just one system on the ship. This is just the Mark 37 gunfire control system as it relates to the 5-inch guns. All of this is just the different redundancies and ways you can cross-connect that. And at the end of the day, that's what a battleship is. Massive redundancy. You can keep taking hits and you can just keep rerouting stuff so that you can keep dealing out hits yourself. Thanks for watching this video on the Mark 37 gunfire control system. If you have any experience with this type of system, let us know in the comment section down below. We tend to gloss it over when we're going through our tours because right next door is the Mark 8 fire control computer where we're talking about the Mark 38 gunfire control system for the 16-inch guns. And people tend to get more of a kick out of that, but there are far fewer 16-inch fire controlmen out there than 5-inch fire controlmen. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State. We also receive support from a number of other places, whether they are organizations or private individuals like yourself. And the support we've received from private individuals has allowed us to go from shooting one video a week to shooting multiple videos a week. And that has allowed us to make creating YouTube content like this a larger part of our job, thanks to the support that you guys have been giving the museum to make that happen. So because we're making more videos, remember to like, share, and subscribe. And check the description below for a link to ways you can donate to support us. Thanks for watching.